Good morning, everyone. We're going to continue the We Free Men with Chapter 9, Lost Boys. The moan rolled around the clearing as mournful as a month of Mondays. It sounded like some animal in terrible pain. But it was, in fact, not as big as medium-sized Jock, but bigger than wee Jock, who was standing on a snowdrift with one hand pressed to his heart and the other outstretched very theatrically. He was rolling his eyes, too. Ooh. Ugh, the muse is a terrible thing to have happen to you, said Rob Anybody, putting his hands over his ears. Oh, it is with great lamentation and much worrying dismay, the pixie groaned, that we regard the doleful prospect of fairyland in considerable decay. In the air, the flying creatures stopped attacking and began to panic. Some of them flew into one another. With quite a large number of dreadful incidents happening every day, not as big as medium-sized Jock, but bigger than wee Jock recited, including, I am sorry to say, an aerial attack by the otherwise quite attractive Fae. The flyers screeched. Some crashed into the snow, but the ones still capable of flight swarmed off among the trees. Witnessed by all of us at this time, and celebrated in this hasty rhyme. Not as big as medium-sized Jock, but bigger than wee Jock shouted after them, and they were gone. Feagles were picking themselves up off the ground. Some were bleeding, where the fairies had bitten them. Several were lying curled up and groaning. Tiffany looked down at her own finger. The bite of the fairy had left 2 tiny holes. Isn't it too bad? Rob Anybody shouted up from below. No one taken by them. Just a few cases where the lads didn't put their hands over their ears in time. Are they all right? Oh, they'll be fine with counselling. On the mound of snow, William clapped not as big as medium-sized Jock, but bigger than wee Jock on the shoulder in a friendly way. That lad, he said proudly, was some of the worst poetry I have ever heard for a long time. It was offensive to the ear and a torture to the soul. The last couple of lines need some work, but you has the groaning off fine. All in all, a very commendable effort. We'll make a Gonagle out of you yet. Not as big as medium-sized Jock, but bigger than wee Jock blushed happily. In fairyland, words really have power, Tiffany thought. And I am more real. I'll remember that. The pixies assembled into battle order again, although it was pretty disorderly, and set off. Tiffany didn't rush too far ahead this time. That's your little people with wings, said Rob, as Tiffany sucked at her finger. Are you happier now? Why are they trying to carry you away? They carries their victims off to their nest, where their young ones... Stop, said Tiffany. This is going to be horrible, right? Oh, aye, gruesome, said Rob, grinning. And you used to live here? But it wasn't all so bad then. It wasn't a perfect marquee, but the Queen wasn't cold in them days. The King was still around. She was always happy then. What happened? Did the King die? No, they had words, if you take my meaning, said Rob. Oh, you mean like an argument? A bit, maybe, said Rob. But they was magical words. Forests destroyed, mountains exploding, a few hundred deaths, that kind of thing. And he went off to his own world. Fairyland was never a picnic, you ken, even in the old days. But it was fine if you kept alert, and there was flowers and birdies in summertime. Now there's the dromes and the hounds and the stinging fae and such stuff creeping in from their own worlds. And the whole place has gone down the tubes. Things taken from their own worlds, thought Tiffany, as she tramped through the snow. Worlds all squashed together like peas in a sack, or hidden inside one another like bubbles inside other bubbles. She had a picture in her head of the things creeping out to their own world and into another, in the same way that mice invaded the larder. Only there were worse things than mice. What would a drome do if it got into our world? You'd never know it was there. It'd sit in the corner and you'd never see it, because it wouldn't let you. And it'd change the way you saw the world, give you nightmares, make you want to die. Her second thoughts added, I wonder how many have got in already and we don't know. And I'm in fairyland where dreams can hurt. Somewhere all stories are real, all songs are true. I thought that was a strange thing for a Kelda to say. Tiffany's second thought said, hang on. Was that a first thought? And Tiffany thought, no, that was a third thought. I'm thinking about how I think about what I'm thinking. At least I think so. Her second thought said, let's all calm down, please, because this is quite a small head. The forest went on, or perhaps it was a small forest and somehow moved around them as they walked. This is fairyland, after all. You couldn't trust it. And the snow still vanished where Tiffany walked, and she only had to look at a tree for it to smarten up and make an effort to look like a real tree. The queen is, well, a queen, Tiffany thought. She's got a world of her own. She could do anything with it. And all she does is steal things, mess people's lives up. There was the thud of hoofbeats in the distance. It's her. What shall I do? What shall I say? The Knack McFeegle leaped behind the trees. Come away you to the path, hissed Rob Anybody. She might still have him, said Tiffany, gripping the panhandle nervously and staring at the blue shadows between the trees. So, we'll find a way to steal him. She's the queen. You cannot beat the queen face to face. The hoofbeats were louder, and now it sounded as though there was more than one animal. A stag appeared through the trees, steam pouring off of it. It stared at Tiffany with wild red eyes and then, bunching up, leaped over her. She smelled the stink of it as she ducked. She felt its sweat on her neck. It was a real animal. You couldn't imagine a reek like that. And here came the dogs. The first one she caught with the edge of the pan, bowling it over. The other turned to snap at her, then looked down in amazement as pixies erupted from the snow under each paw. It was hard to bite anyone when all four of your feet were moving away in different directions, and then other pixies landed on its head, and biting anything ever again soon became impossible. The Knack McFeegle hated grim hounds. Tiffany looked up at the white horse. That was real too, as far as she could tell, and there was a boy on it. Who are you? He said. He made it sound like, what sort of thing are you? Who are you? Said Tiffany, pushing her hair out of her eyes. It was the best she could do right now. This is my forest, said the boy. I command you to do what I say. Tiffany peered at him. The dull second-hand light of fairyland was not very good, but the more she looked, the more certain she was. Your name is Roland, isn't it? She said. You will not speak to me like that. Yes, it is. You're the Baron's son. I demand that you stop talking. The boy's expression was strange now, creased up and pink as if he was trying not to cry. He raised his hand with a riding whip in it. There was a very faint thwap. Tiffany glanced down. The Knack McFeegle had formed a pile under the horse's belly, and one of them, climbing up on their shoulders, had just cut enough of the saddle girth. She held up a hand quickly. Stand still, she shouted, trying to sound commanding. If you move, you'll fall off your horse. Is that a spell? Are you a witch? The boy dropped the whip and pulled a long dagger from his belt. Death to witches! He urged the horse forward with a jerk, and then there was one of those long moments, a moment when the whole universe said, uh-oh. And still holding the dagger, the boy swiveled around the horse and landed in the snow. Tiffany knew what would happen next. Rob Anybody's voice echoed among the trees. You're in trouble now, pal. Get him! No, Tiffany yelled. Get away from him. The boy scrambled backwards, staring at Tiffany in horror. I do know you, she said. Your name is Roland. You're the Baron's son. They said you died in the forest. You mustn't talk about that. Why not? Bad things happen. They're already happening, said Tiffany. Look, I'm here to rescue my... But the boy had got to his feet and was running back through the forest. He turned and shouted, Get away from me! Tiffany ran after him, jumping over snow-covered logs, and saw him ahead, dodging from tree to tree. Then he paused and looked back. She ran up to him, saying, I know how to get you out, and danced. She was holding the hand of a parrot, or at least someone with the head of a parrot. Her feet moved under her perfectly. They twirled her around, and this time her hand was caught by a peacock, or at least someone with the head of a peacock. She glanced over his shoulder and saw that she was now in a room, no, a ballroom, full of masked people dancing. Ah, she thought, another dream. I should have looked where I was going. The music was strange. There was a kind of rhythm to it, but it sounded muffled and odd, as it was being played backwards underwater, by musicians who'd never seen their instruments before. And she hoped the dancers were wearing masks. She realized she was looking through the eye holes of one and wondered what she was. She was also wearing a long dress, which glittered. Okay, she thought carefully. There was a drome there, and I didn't stop to look, and now I'm in a dream, but it's not mine. I must make use of what it finds in your head, and I've never been to anything like this. Fwa wah fwa wah wah, said the peacock. The voice was like music. It sounded almost like a voice, but it wasn't. Oh, yes, said Tiffany, fine. Fwa. Oh, woof, woof, woof. This seemed to work. The peacock-headed dancer bobbed a little bow and said, Wah, woof, woof, sadly, and wandered off. Somewhere in here is the drome, said Tiffany to herself. And it must be a pretty good one. This is a big dream. Little things were wrong, though. There were hundreds of people in the room, but the ones in the distance, although they were moving about in quite a natural way, seemed the same as the trees. Blobs and swirls of color. You had to look hard to notice this, though. First sight, Tiffany thought. People in brilliant costumes and still more masks walked arm in arm past her, as if she were just another guest. Those who weren't joining the new dance were heading for the long tables at one side of the hall, which were piled with food. Tiffany had seen such food only in pictures. People didn't starve on a farm, but even when food was plentiful at Hogswatch or after the harvest, it never looked like this. The farm food was mostly shades of white or brown. It was never pink and blue and never wobbled. There were things on sticks and things that gleamed and glistened in bowls. Nothing was simple. Everything had cream on it, or chocolate whorls, or thousands of little colored balls. Everything was spun or glazed or added to or mixed up. This wasn't food. It was what food became if it had been good and had gone to food heaven. It wasn't just for eating, it was for show. It was piled up against mounds of greenery and enormous arrangements of flowers. Here and there, huge transparent carvings were landmarks in the landscape of food. Tiffany reached up and touched a glittering cockerel. It was ice, damp under her fingertips. There were others, too. A jolly fat man, a bowl of fruits all carved in ice, a swan. Tiffany was for a moment tempted. It seemed a very long time since she had eaten anything. But the food was too obviously not food at all. It was bait. It was supposed to say, Hello, little kitty, eat me. I'm getting the hang of this, thought Tiffany. Good job the creature didn't think of cheese. And there was cheese. Suddenly, cheese had always been there. She'd seen pictures of lots of different cheeses in the almanac. She was good at cheese and had always wondered what the other tasted like. They were faraway cheeses with strange-sounding names, cheeses like Treble Wibbly, Wainy Tasty, Old Arg, Red Runny, and the legendary Lanker Blue, which had to be nailed to the table to stop it attacking other cheeses. Just a taste wouldn't hurt, surely. It wasn't the same as eating it, was it? After all, she was in control, wasn't she? She'd seen right through the dream straight away, hadn't she? So it couldn't have any effect, could it? And well, cheese was hardly temptation for anyone. Okay, the drone must have put the cheese in as soon as she'd thought of it, but she was already holding the cheese knife. She didn't quite remember picking it up. A drop of cold water landed on her hand. It made her glance up at the nearest glittering ice carving. Now it was a shepherdess, with a saddlebag dress and a big bonnet. Tiffany was sure it had been a swan when she'd looked at it before. The anger came back. She'd nearly been fooled. She looked at the cheese knife. Be a sword, she said. After all, the drone was making her dream, but she was doing the dreaming. She was real. Part of her wasn't asleep. There was a clang. Correction, said Tiffany. Be a sword that isn't so heavy. And this time she got something she could actually hold. There was a rustling in the greenery, and a red-haired face poked out. Psst, it whispered. Dinna eat the canapes. You're a bit late. Ah, well, it's a cunning old drome you're dealing with here, said Rob Anybody. The dream wouldn't have let us in unless we was properly dressed. He stepped out looking very sheepish in a black suit with a bow tie. There was more rustling and other pixies pushed their way out of the greenery. They looked a bit like red-headed penguins. Properly dressed, said Tiffany. Aye, said Daft Woolley, who had a piece of lettuce on his head. And these trousers are a wee bit chafing around the nethers, if I don't mind telling you. Have you spotted the creature yet? Said Rob Anybody. No, it's so crowded. We'll help you look, said Rob Anybody. The thing canna hide if you ride up close. Be careful, mind you. If it thinks you're gonna whap at one, there's nae telling what it'll try. Spread out, lads, and pretend you're enjoying the ceilidh. What? Do you mean get drunk and fight and that? Said Daft Woolley. Crivens, you wouldn't believe it, said Rob Anybody, rolling his eyes. Nay, you puddin'. This is a posh party, you ken. That means you make small talk and mingle. Ah, I'm a famous mingler. They won't even know we're here, said Daft Woolley. Come on. Even in a dream, even at a posh ball, the Knack McFeagle knew how to behave. You charged in madly, and you screamed. Politely. Lovely weather for the time of year, is it not, you wee scunner? Hey, Jimmy, have you not got a pommes frites for an old pal? The band is playing divinely, I dinna think. Make my caviar deep fried, will ya? There was something wrong with the crowd. No one was panicking or trying to run away, which was certainly the right response to an invasion of Feagles. Tiffany set off again through the crowd. The masked people at the party paid her no attention either, and that's because they're background people, she thought, just like the background trees. She walked along the room to a pair of double doors and pulled them open. There was nothing but blackness beyond it. So the only way out was to find the drome. She hadn't really expected anything else. It could be anywhere. It could be behind a mask, it could be a table, it could be anything. Tiffany stared at the crowd. And it was then she saw Roland. He was sitting at a table by himself. It was spread with food and he had a spoon in his hand. She ran over and knocked it onto the floor. Haven't you got any sense at all? She said, pulling him upright. Do you want to stay here forever? And then she felt the movement behind her. Later on, she was sure she hadn't heard anything. She'd just known. It was a dream, after all. She glanced around and there was the drome. It was almost hidden behind a pillar. Roland just stared at her. Are you all right? Said Tiffany, desperately trying to shake him. Have you eaten anything? Fwah, 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 muttered the boy. Tiffany turned back to the drome. It was moving towards her, but very slowly, trying to stay in the shadows. It looked like a little snowman made of dirty snow. The music was getting louder. The candles were getting brighter. Out on the huge dance floor, the animal-headed couples whirled faster and faster, and the floor shook. The dream was in trouble. The Knack McFeagle were running to her from every part of the floor, trying to be heard above the din. The drome was lurching toward her, podgy white fingers grasping the air. First sight, breathed Tiffany. She cut Roland's head off. The snow had melted all across the clearing, and the trees looked like real properly tree-like. In front of Tiffany, the drome fell backwards. She was holding the old frying pan in her hand, but it had cut beautifully. Odd things, dreams. She turned and faced Roland, who was staring at her with a face so pale he might as well have been a drome. It was frightened, she said. It wanted me to attack you instead. It tried to look like you and made you look like a drome, but it didn't know how to speak. You do. You might have killed me, he said hoarsely. No, said Tiffany. I just explained. Please don't run away. Have you seen a baby boy here? Roland's face wrinkled. What? He said. The Queen took him, said Tiffany. I'm going to fetch him. I'll take you too, if you like. You'll never get away, whispered Roland. I got in, didn't I? Getting in is easy. No one gets out. I mean to find a way, said Tiffany, trying to sound a lot more confident than she felt. She won't let you. Roland started to back away again. Please don't be so stupid, said Tiffany. I'm going to find the Queen and get my brother back, whatever you say. Understand? I've got this far, and I've got help, you know. Where? Said Roland. Tiffany looked around. There was no sight of the Knack McFeagle. They always turn up, she said, just when I need them. It struck her that there was suddenly something very empty about the force, and it seemed colder, too. They'll be here any minute, she added hopefully. They got trapped in the dream, said Roland flatly. They can't have. I killed the drone. It's more complicated than that, said the boy. You don't know what it's like in here. The dreams inside dreams. There's other things that live inside the dreams, horrible things. You never know if you've really woken up, and the Queen controls them all. They're fairy people anyway. You can't trust them. You can't trust anyone. I don't trust you. You're probably just another dream. He turned his back and walked away, following the line of hoofprints. Tiffany hesitated. The only other real person was going away, leaving her here with nothing but the trees and the shadows. And of course, anything horrible that was running toward her through them. She said, Hello? Rob anybody? William? Daft Wooly? There was no reply. There wasn't even an echo. She was alone, apart from the heartbeats. Well, of course she'd fought things and won, hadn't she? But the Knack McFeagle had been there, and somehow that'd make it easy. They never gave up. They'd attack absolutely anything, and they didn't know the meaning of the word fear. Tiffany, who had read her way through the dictionary, had a second thought there. Fear was only one of thousands of words the Pixies probably didn't know the meaning of. Unfortunately, she did know what it meant, and the taste and feel of fear, too, and she felt it now. She gripped the pan. It didn't seem quite as good of a weapon anymore. The cold blue shadows between the trees seemed to be spreading out. They were darkest ahead of her, where the hoofprints led. Strangely, enough of the wood behind her seemed almost light and inviting. Someone doesn't want me to go on, she thought. That was quite encouraging. But the twilight was misty and shimmered unpleasantly. Anything could be waiting. She was waiting, too. She realized that she was waiting for the Knack McFeegle, hoping against hope that she'd heard a sudden cry, even of Crivens. She was sure it was a swear word. She pulled out the toad, which lay snoring on the palm of her hand, and gave it a prod. Whoop, it croaked. I'm stuck in a wood of evil dreams, and I'm all alone, and I think it's getting darker, said Tiffany. What should I do? The toad opened one bleary eye and said, Leave? That's not a lot of help. Best advice there is, said the toad. Now put me back. The cold makes me lethargic. Reluctantly, Tiffany put the creature back in her apron pocket, and her hand touched Diseases of Sheep. She pulled it out and opened it at random. There was a cure for the steams, but it had been crossed out in pencil. Written again in the margin, Granny Aking's big, round, careful handwriting was, The steams. A great shiverin', followed by vapor of the ears. Turpentine. Tiffany closed the book with care and put it back gently so as not to disturb the sleeping toad. Then, gripping the pan's handle tightly, she stepped into the long blue shadows. How do you get shadows when there's no sun in the sky, she thought, because it was better to think about things like this than all the other, much worse things that were on her mind. But these shadows didn't need light to create them. They crawled around on the snow of their own accord and backed away when she walked towards them. That, at least, was a relief. They piled up behind her. They were following her. She turned and stamped her foot a few times, and they scurried off behind the trees, but she knew they were flowing back when she wasn't looking. She saw a drome in the distance ahead of her, standing half-hidden behind a tree. She screamed at it and waved the pan threateningly, and it lumbered off quickly. When she looked around, she saw two more behind her, a long way back. The track led uphill a little into what looked like a much thicker mist. It glowed faintly. She headed for it. There was no other way to go. When she reached the top of the rise, she looked down into the shadow valley. There were 4 dromes in it, big ones, bigger than any she'd seen so far. They were sitting down in a square, their dumpy legs stretched out in front of them. Each one had a gold collar up around its neck attached to a chain. Tame ones? Tiffany wondered aloud, but who could put a collar around the neck of a drome? Only someone who could dream as well as they could. We tamed the sheepdogs to help us herd sheep, she thought. The queen uses dromes to herd dreams. In the center of the square, formed by the dromes in the air full of mist, the hoof tracks and the tracks of Roland led down the past tamed drones and into the cloud. Tiffany spun around. The shadows darted back. There was nothing else nearby. No bird sang. Nothing moved in the woods. But she could make out 3 more dromes now, their big, round, soggy faces peering at her around tree trunks. She was being herded. At a time like this, it would be nice to have someone around to say something like, "No, it's too dangerous, don't do it." Unfortunately, there wasn't. She was going to commit an act of extreme bravery, and no one would know if it all went wrong. That was frightening, but also annoying. That was it, annoying. This place annoyed her. It was all stupid and strange. It was the same feeling she'd had when Jenny had leaped out of the river. Out of her river, and the queen had taken her brother. Maybe it was selfish to think like that, but anger was better than fear. Fear was a damp, cold mess, but anger had an edge. She could use it. They were herding her, like a sheep. Well, an angry sheep could send a vicious dog away whimpering. So, 4 big dromes sitting in a square. It was going to be a big dream. Raising the pan to shoulder height to swipe at anything that came near, and suppressing a dreadful urge to go to the toilet, Tiffany walked slowly down the slope, across the snow, through the mist, and into summer. And that's it for Chapter 9. Next up is going to be Chapter 10. See you guys soon.